Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Merle Massey. I'm the coordinator for undergraduate research initiatives at the University of Saskatchewan. And we have a whole series around entrepreneurship here at the University of Saskatchewan this summer for our SURE program, Student Undergraduate Research Experience. These entrepreneurship modules are gifted to us from Research Excellence and Innovation. So with us today, we have Erin Kulhawi, and Erin is going to talk to us about pathways to commercialization and what support looks like here at the University of Saskatchewan. And with that, I'm going to pass it directly over to Erin.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Merle. First of all, thanks so much for inviting me to come and talk to everybody today about pathways to commercialization. I put pathways because there's usually more than one way to commercialize a product or service. And today I'm going to talk to you about that, what options you have and what supports you have on campus. And myself, I work with the Technology Transfer Office here at the university in Research Excellence and Innovation. So we support all things commercialization on campus. So hopefully I know a couple things about commercialization. I will say I don't know everything, but again, if there's any questions, please always feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer them if you're watching this after the fact. But today, like I said, I really want to talk to you about if you have an idea, what are your options for commercializing? I'm really going to focus on two avenues that we deal with at the university. One is licensing or assigning your intellectual property. The other one is creating a company to drive the commercialization yourself. And I'll talk a little bit about how you can determine what pathway is best for you. And again, what resources are available for you on campus to really get the support you need to drive those products and services forward. So you have an idea, this is fabulous. Every great product starts with a great idea. So it's a great place to be if you have an idea. Not all of us have great ideas, but really now is where your work begins, because I don't want to be the Debbie Downer today, but most ideas don't make it to market. It's just the reality of the situation. And there's a huge gap between having an idea and having a product. And there's an equally big gap between having a product and actually selling that product and being successful in making those sales. It's not always easy to appreciate those gaps as an inventor, as somebody who is really focused and has the expertise in that particular area. A lot goes into developing these products and services. And so you can't wear all the hats and know all of the things. And so today, I'm just going to share some of those things with you and some things you need to think about as you're developing your products and services, just to create some awareness as you're developing, and things you need to think about when you're looking at working with industry partners or looking at getting investment into your company. Oh, and my lovely picture just popped up. So on the bottom, I have there that just because you have a patent, your idea is protected by a patent, doesn't really mean that you have a business opportunity. And the opposite is true. Just because you don't have a patent doesn't mean there's not a business opportunity there for you. I'm not really going to focus a lot on patents and intellectual property. My wonderful colleague, John Mapletoft, is here, and he will discuss that in another session. But I just wanted to share this with you, and I shared this ridiculous picture just to drive home the idea that, okay, these things probably aren't patentable, honestly, but they're probably novel, they're probably new. I bet nobody else is selling these things on the market because they're a little bit ridiculous. Nobody wants a watering can that waters back into itself, or rain boots that, don't protect you from the rain. So these things are probably new. They probably aren't being sold, but it doesn't mean that there's somebody out there that's going to want them. And you need to understand what your market is and whether or not there is a market. And so that kind of theme will keep coming up throughout my talk today, but I just wanted you to be aware that just because something is new and novel and not been done doesn't mean there's an opportunity there to create a business. And just remember that an idea doesn't equal an opportunity. So it takes a lot of time, effort, resources to transform that idea into an opportunity. And there's usually three sort of general common themes or characteristics of an opportunity, business opportunity. One is being potential for economic value. So obviously, if you're going to put time and effort into developing a product or service, you're going to want to create to profit from that, right? It has to be novel or new. So you can't just put something else out on the market that is already out there without any advantages to what your competitors are doing. And then there's got to be perceived desirability. So somebody is going to have to want what you are developing. And I think those sound pretty obvious, I'm sure, These are three sort of general characteristics of all real opportunities. And again, my funny picture of these these dustpan shoes. They're probably new, they're probably novel, I don't know if they're patentable, maybe useful, but there has to be a market for them. Somebody has to want them. And so you have to have all of these components to have a real opportunity in front of you. And so you might be thinking, okay, where do I really begin when I start to think about commercializing? And I just wanted to share a few of the questions that we ask in our office when somebody comes and discloses an invention to us. So these are the things that we start to think about upfront when we start to try to identify what the opportunity is and what the commercial pathway might be. So first is, does your idea or solution address a real market problem or a need? And this, oh, I'm sorry, the timing is all off here. This really stems from understanding your customer. So do you have something that is fulfilling a need in your customer? Oftentimes what we'll see is because you're so focused on what you're developing that product to be, that sometimes you forget to think about the end user when you're developing. And so you'll have a solution that's looking for a problem instead of the other way around. And so a lot of times companies, when they're developing products or services, will go to their customers and do what we call customer discovery. So we ask them about what we're developing. We ask them what their problems are in a particular area, what kind of solutions they're looking for. And that really drives research and development in a lot of ways. And so if you're working with industry and investors, this is a question that's going to come up time and time again. And this is something we like to answer early on. You're not going to have all the answers up front, but at least have an idea of what your market might be, how big it is, how many customers you might have, and those sorts of things. So is there a market? Do you have a minimum viable product that works? So this is the difference between having an idea and then having a product that actually it does what you say it does, or can do what you think it's supposed to do. So as an example, let's say you're developing an app for that translates languages. So you want people to be able to travel with ease and be able to talk to local people and have an app that can translate language very quickly. And the difference between having an idea of doing that, there's a difference between having the idea for that and actually having some software that shows you can translate different languages. And this is a question, this is sort of a starting point for commercialization, because if you have some sort of product, this is what you'll need to show that that product is patentable and can be protected. And investors and industry partners will come back to you time and time again to understand what that product is and how it works. Does your invention have advantages over the competition? So again, if we take the example of the language translating app, it's important to know if you're developing this app, are there other apps that can translate languages? Likely there are. So understanding how your app is different or better is really important. And that will inform future product development as well. So say the problem with other apps is they don't translate languages very efficiently. There's a lot of errors, or maybe they don't translate as many languages as you would like. And so maybe that's where your differentiation points are from your competitors. But just sort of understanding where you are in the market is a really important question to at least think about early on. And then the last thing, and I say this is optional because, like I said, not every invention is patentable and not every patent is equal to business opportunity. But it's important to understand what intellectual property you have. What are you protecting? What is your value? So not everything is patentable, but it is very important to understand what your strategy is for protecting. And like I said, John will go over this, but I just want to take a step back and talk about intellectual property because it is the basis for some of the discussion downstream about licensing and company creation. And when I say intellectual property, it's really different than any other type of property that you could own. It's more of an intangible type of property where there's value, and it's usually creations of the mind or creations of the intellect, so intellectual property. But okay, let me say, for example, I have this book and I can own this book. Let's say this is a chapter book. It's not, but let's just say it is. So I can own this. This is my property. What I do not own, if this was a chapter book, are the words within this book, right? The words are the authors, and that is copyrighted. So that is owned by the author. And that's really where the value lies, is in that intellect and those creative ideas within that book. So that is a type of intellectual property where there's inherent value in what's inside. And I can own the book, but I cannot own what's inside. I cannot recreate those words and go and sell them because I don't have those rights. So that's what I mean by intellectual property, more intangible. Same thing if I go buy a cake, I can buy the physical cake, but I don't have the recipe for that cake. And so the recipe is where that inherent value lies. That's where the intellectual property is. That might be kept as a trade secret, like Coca-Cola. They don't give away their recipe. It's a different type of intellectual property. But it takes years of culinary school to put together that recipe, and so that's where the value is. So that's it's a different type of ownership. So that's what we'll be talking about when we're talking about giving away intellectual property rights. So it can be patented, it can be trademarked, it can be copyrighted, and like I said, John will talk about all those different ways in which you can protect your intellectual property. So just some things to think about. We'll talk now a little bit about the different options for commercializing. Really focusing on the difference between licensing and company creation. So when you license or you assign intellectual property, what you're really doing is you're giving the rights to somebody else. You're passing on that baton and saying, you take on the commercialization of this technology, this product, this service. Versus company creation, you are retaining the rights. You are creating your own company, and you are further developing that intellectual property and creating more value in that product or service. So when you license, again, you're allowing somebody to use your intellectual property, and that's usually in exchange for some sort of financial return. I'll talk a little bit about this when I talk about licensing terms, but usually it comes in the form of like a royalty. So if they end up making sales of the product based on the intellectual property they use from you, you get a return on that, so a percentage of sales. So let's say they sell a product for $10 and you get a 10% royalty. You get $1 for every $10 for every product they sell comes back to you as the inventor, because you're allowing them to use your intellectual property. When you license out, ideally the partner is a larger company that has the means to scale the technology and sell it in the marketplace. So somebody who sort of has the expertise, the know-how, has been there and done that, and really has the ability to get it out to the market. You want somebody that has that expertise, because if you license out your product or your intellectual property to somebody who doesn't really understand or know what they're doing, chances are nobody benefits, because that product is not going to make it to market. So again, you're allowing somebody else to do the commercialization and lead on that. Company creation, again, create your own company, and you are holding that baton and advancing the technology development. Often here, the goal is to further development of your product or service and downstream be acquired by a larger company. Or you'll want to develop that technology to a point where it has greater value and can be licensed out. Sometimes company creation is born out of necessity because there's no real receptor. There's no real licensing partner. Maybe it's too early. You need to create more value in that product or service. So it's de-risked to a point where somebody would want to take it on. So those are endpoints. And ultimately, you can also take on full development, and you can sell that product or service. If you're developing software and you can do all the back-end service providing to your customers, then that's a possibility as well. Things like therapeutics, though, it's very difficult to be that end provider that manufactures and sells those drugs. And so oftentimes you are selling or being acquired to a larger company, because it's very difficult to compete with the Pfizers and the GSKs and the Johnson & Johnsons of the world when they have all of that expertise and multi-million-dollar companies and a real big presence in the market. So there's multiple ways to exit from a startup, and so you're just creating more value by developing your product or service for longer. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each pathway to help make a decision on what might be best for you. So When you're licensing or assigning or handing off that intellectual property to a partner for commercializing, usually if that partner is well established, you will have faster entry into the market. So if you want to see your product or service get into the market quickly, and you know there's a partner in place that can do that with that expertise, you'll see returns more quickly with that arrangement. You can make passive income. So if you are getting a percentage of whatever sales your partner is making, you don't have to do anything else for those sales. They take on all the back end work to commercialize and market and sell that product. And so that's more passive income that comes to you, and you can put that in your pocket. And then again, it's reduced time and effort and resources on your end because you're passing that over to somebody else that has the means to do it efficiently. So you don't have to build that from the ground up, which can be very difficult. The cons to licensing or assigning is that it's often difficult to license products or services at a very early stage. I think this is particularly true in the life sciences field. Therapeutics, again, is a really good example where most drugs don't make it to market, and there's a really high bar for industry partners taking on risk because there's a huge amount of money and development that need to go into that. So it's really difficult to license those types of technologies early on, and sometimes company creation is required to get the resources to further development, so it is attractive to a partner. So that can be a con. There's less return if you license it early. So if you're lucky enough to actually license your product out very early, usually the partner, when they're licensing early, they're taking on more risk in your technology and developing that. And so they're going to want to see greater return for their investment. And so you usually lose out a little bit on the return because they're taking it on so early. And then again, you lose a bit of control when you license out your technology because you're putting your trust in that partner to take on the development and commercialization. And so, you no longer have a say in where that gets commercialized. Sometimes, you don't have a say in how that gets developed. And so you're relinquishing a bit of control. And if you don't want to do that, then maybe licensing isn't the right pathway for you. And then company creation, the pros are, and I'll talk about this in a couple of slides, but there tend to be greater financing options for startup companies. There's just other opportunities through government grants and venture funding that are not available to individual people as opposed to companies. So I'll have a slide on that. I'll share a bit more details around that. Again, a pro is that there is a larger return if you're successful because you're taking on more risk and developing that internally for longer. So the more you develop it, the less risky it becomes to invest in it. And so the larger return you can receive because you've taken on more of that risk. And so any agreement that you make with a partner, you can get more from that. And then you have greater control over technology development. Obviously, you're the one who's leading commercialization, so you have a say in how it gets developed, where it gets commercialized, how funding goes in to support the development. So again, you have greater control if that's something that you're really passionate about. Cons are there's a high risk of failure. So most startups do fail. It's sort of the reality of the situation. I think it's upwards of 90% of startups will fail. And I know that sounds like a horrible number, but it takes a lot of time and effort. And that's not to say that you won't gain something valuable out of being part of a startup, but there is a high risk. On the flip side of that, if you do become successful, there's a huge reward to being part of that startup. Cons, there's business costs. So you're taking on more costs of running a business. If you need legal services, that's on you to pay for. If you need to pay for patent costs, that's on you. If you need space or if you need equipment or you need personnel, these are all things to consider. You don't necessarily need all of these things early on, but as you grow and develop, there are things you might need more and more of. And so you'll need to look for funding opportunities for those resources that you need. And then time taken away from other activities. So startup is not for the faint of heart. Like I said, a lot of times it takes a lot of time and resources, a lot of your own time, right, to be really successful it's not really a side hustle for long. You need to put a lot of your own time and effort in. So it can take away, if you're in academia, if you have a full-time job, it can take away from other things in your life. And so that's just, as much as it's a business decision, I think there's a lot of personal considerations that have to go into developing a startup as well. So just some things to consider and think about. I'm sure there's other pros and cons that I'm missing here, but these are just some of the few that kind of came to mind when I thought about licensing versus startup. I want to talk briefly about license agreements and startups and how funding comes in and how you can, make that money from licensing versus startups. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about the structure of the license agreement and how money is made through these agreements and what terms are common. So license agreements usually are exclusive agreements between you and a third party. Usually your industry partner or whoever your partner is will want exclusive rights, and that allows them to be the only person or only company to work on your product or service and sell your product or service. So that's usually what we see. Sometimes the agreements are non-exclusive. In that case, you are able to license to this partner, but also other partners. So they will have direct competition if you do license to somebody else. Situations where this occurs is often when it's not a huge detriment to the company you're licensing to have other competitors in the space. It's not going to make or break their market. They're usually pretty well established already. A good example would be companies that sell reagents to researchers for use. Examples in antibodies. So we'll do non-exclusive licenses for antibodies for research purposes. To stain different tissues. So those companies are usually they're well established in their market. Having access to an additional antibody is not going to make or break it. And usually these agreements are for a lot less money. And so there's not a lot at stake in terms of financial return. Your licenses can be territory based. So oftentimes people will want a worldwide license so that they can enter into any market in the world. But you might want to just license to your partner for a certain territory. So for example, say you have a partner that's really well established in the market in Brazil, but maybe not so much established in the rest of the world. So maybe you'll license to them only for rights to Brazil so they can commercialize there. And then you retain the rights to commercialize, say, in North America, where you have stronger connections in the marketplace. Your license can also be based on field of use. So another example is for a therapeutic. If you have a therapeutic that can be applied for or can be used for treating breast cancer, and you have a partner that's really well established in that space, you can license to them for only treatment of breast cancer. Maybe they don't want to look at other indications, and maybe the target for your therapeutic can actually be useful in, say, Alzheimer's disease. Then maybe you go and license for Alzheimer's disease to another partner and gain value in both indications. So it can be applied based on the application as well. Again, I said that these license agreements are usually royalty-based. You're usually getting a percentage back of whatever your partner is selling. Comes back if you're to the university and to the inventors. Usually we ask for repayment of patent costs because we put a lot of money in up front to pay for those patents, and they're getting access to that intellectual property. And then, you can be creative, and there's no real one prescription for a license agreement. Depending on the field of use, you can add in things like milestone payments. I keep coming back to this therapeutics example, but a lot of times as the therapeutic is being developed, you're creating more and more value. And by the time you get to, say, clinical trials, there's a lot of value that's being created there. So maybe you'll get a milestone payment that comes back because the company is seeing a lot of value at that point. Or once you hit FDA approval, you can ask for funding or for money back once they hit that point. So you can add in different milestones, upfront payments, but usually they're royalty based on a territory, based on a field of use. And again, this is money that's going back into the inventor's pocket. So money that comes back is going back to you and going back into your pocket. As opposed to a startup company, where, oops, can't skip that slide. So as opposed to a startup company where you're leading the commercialization through the company, money into the company usually comes from fundraising. I'll talk about different avenues for fundraising, but usually that money goes back into the company for technology development and business activities. So inventors don't usually see any money back into their pockets right away. Usually inventors will be founders and they will own part of the company, so they'll own shares. So later downstream, when the company sells, you sell your ownership, you sell your shares, and that's how you can create value. That's how you can get money back to you as an individual inventor. Or if you actually start selling products and you start making a profit, that's when you can see money back to you. But usually early on, any funding that goes into the company goes into it for business activities. So it might take longer to see a return on your investment in your own company. Usually the motivation for company creation is driven by probably a lot more than this, but these are a few things that I could think of. So a need for an alternate funding options, which I'll talk about. Lack of a suitable industry partner to take on the technology, often driven by things being too early stage, especially if we're talking about university developed intellectual property. And then, sometimes researchers are just really passionate about their product or their service, and they really want to see it get to market, and they really feel like they're the best people to do that. And they want to start their own company and drive it themselves, at least for a period of time. And so that is another real motivation for people to start their own company. So financing options, I talked a little bit about this already, that there are some differences when it comes to you as an individual licensing your technology and accessing funds versus you as a company funding your development and accessing funds. So licensing, and I'm really thinking about it in the context of the university. These are the product development, so developing your product or your service is usually funded early stage through things like grants, government grants like Tri-Council, NSERC, CIHR, SHRC. And so a lot of the early stage development happens in the research lab at the university and sort of incubated in the university lab. Sometimes industry collaborators will be interested in your product or service, not really ready to take on a license to your intellectual property, but interested enough that they might put some funding in to sort of evaluate the opportunity further. And so this is where industry collaboration can be valuable, and they might put funds directly into your lab to develop that product or service further. You can also access government funds to bolster any funding that comes from industry. So there are grants available through things like NSERC Alliance, where the government will match funding that industry puts in. And this is attractive to all parties. Industry likes it because they're leveraging funds that they're putting in, and the researcher gets funding for their lab and moving their technology forward. So everybody sort of wins in this situation. And ultimately, the most desirable outcome is to license that technology to your industry partner that you're working with. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. Really depends on the technology and how developed it is and the interest from the partner. With a startup, there's a lot more options available. Personal investment is one of them, and I think personal investment is probably true for either option, to be honest. But I see it a lot more when inventors have created their own company, and they'll put their own money out of pocket into paying for things like patent costs. Another option is friends and family. So these are usually your biggest supporters, your biggest believers. I've seen startup companies raise hundreds of thousands of dollars through friends and family. And a lot of these options that I'm going to talk about are agreements where money is given for ownership in the company. And this can be true for friends and family financing, but usually that money has less strings attached to it than it would with other more formal organizations. But friends and family is one route. Venture capital is another route. So these are larger organizations. This is private equity investment. So these organizations have hundreds of millions to billions of dollars in a fund, and they will invest in a number of different products and services that they see high value and high potential for return on their investment. And again, this is a scenario where they give you money, and typically what you give them is some level of ownership in your company. And so the level of ownership depends on how much money they give you. There's often more strings attached to venture capital funding. They'll want more say in how the company is run. They'll want to have more of a voice, as opposed to, say, friends and family who really put all their trust in you. So, you know, timing of getting venture capital funding is really important. Understanding the value that they bring to your company is also important, because you are giving up some ownership. And then angel investors, again, similar setup where they give you money, you give them ownership. But these are usually high net worth individuals that are interested in your product for, you know, some reason. So they have a lot of money personally. They're pulling from their own pocket to put money into your company. And say, for example, this person has a family member who has been afflicted by multiple sclerosis, and they just have a real passion for finding a treatment, and they're interested in what you're doing. And so they might want to invest in you because they have a personal interest in moving, you know, treatment options forward for that. So again, you're giving up some ownership for money from these individuals. You know, it depends on the individual investor and how involved they are in your company. And there's usually a little less strings attached to their money in the way they use it, but not necessarily less strings attached in how they're involved in your company. So just some things to think about when you're getting invested from those groups. There's also business incubators. So these are organizations that really support and mentor companies and help to train them in, you know, sort of build up their business acumen, help them develop and build their business strategy. And in the end, some of these incubators have funding for these companies. Usually this is funding, again, in the realm of, well, I guess I shouldn't say always, but it can be, again, funding where you're getting some funding and giving up some ownership in your company. An example of this is Creative Destruction Labs. It was built at the Rotman School of Business in Toronto. It's now in a number of provinces in Canada, and it's a pretty rigorous mentorship training program where they have investors who are helping you to develop your business plan, helping you to develop your strategy. In the end, if you successfully go through this entire program, the likelihood of getting investment is pretty high. And so not every incubator offers that type of funding, but some do. And then government grants and subsidies. And so this is a really important one I want to highlight, because this is one, these things are opportunities where you're not necessarily giving up ownership. So this is something to be really aware of, to identify what you qualify for in your province or, you know, in Canada in general. This is what we call non-dilutive funding often. So you're not giving away anything in terms of ownership to further develop your product or service. And a big one in Canada is the National Research Council Industrial Research Assistance Program, I think it's called, Irap. And this program, you know, you have to develop a proposal to develop your product or service, and essentially you can get funding to fund up to 80% of salaries for a certain period of time, and up to 50% of contract work that needs to be done. So if you need prototypes to be developed, or you need, you know, to access lab services. So it's a way to really leverage funding from the government. You don't have to pay it back. You're not taking ownership. So you're really gaining a lot of value and allowing yourself to develop your product further without diluting ownership in your company. So it's really important to be aware of these types of funding opportunities to really determine what best suits you for the stage of development that you're at. Just generally some important things to think about and understand when you're working with industry and investors. And this is true for both if you're licensing as an individual, or if you're working as a company, when you're working with and talking with industry and investors, I think it's good to come to the table with common understanding where each of you are at. It makes for a better relationship, a more successful relationship. So, as an inventor, understand that oftentimes industry and investors are really hyper-focused on marketing, and it's essential to understand that market, and they'll ask you those questions time and time again. And those considerations have to happen early on in your research and development process. It cannot be an afterthought. So just being aware of that and being able to have those conversations, oftentimes understanding your market can inform the way you develop your product. And so it can be an iterative process. And so just understanding that this is important to an industry partner, you will be asked about it. So just thinking about that as you're going through your research and development process. Also important to keep in mind that there's significant funds that have to be raised on the back end to support all of those commercial activities. I think industry needs to understand there's a lot of upfront costs and blood, sweat, and tears that goes into developing your research programs, but on the same side of that, there's a lot of money and time that goes into developing commercial products. And so just being aware of that and understanding that they're also taking risk when they invest in you, I think is just an important awareness to have about your partner working with them. And then just understanding companies often like to work at accelerated timescales compared to academia. So one of the biggest things, with grants, it's not like working with a granting agency because, there's not a lot of repercussions for not hitting your milestones in a grant, but there can be significant repercussions or dissolving of a relationship if you don't hit your milestones with an industry partner. And so just recognize that they work on those accelerated timelines. And I think it's important to be upfront about realistic timelines for yourself, so you're not put in a situation where you're forced to accelerate a timeline that just isn't possible. So just understanding these things and having these conversations with your industry partner, I think will just build a better relationship. And I just wanted to sort of mention these because it's not always easy to see the opposite side of your partner. And then I'm going to switch gears a little bit now and just talk about commercialization at USask, what your options are, what your supports are. Hopefully I'm doing okay for time, but there's really two options for commercialization at USask, and they really go hand in hand with what I've been talking about in terms of licensing and company creation. One of those options is where USask leads the commercialization. So sort of like handing off that baton, but not really because you're still involved in the race. But when USask leads commercialization, we do things like pay for patent costs. We lead the commercial efforts. So we identify those licensing opportunities, engage with industry partners, and we really lead all of those aspects. And I'll talk a bit more in detail about what we do on the next slide. But in terms of revenue that comes back, if a product is actually commercialized, it's successful at making sales, any money that comes back, 50% of that goes to the university for their efforts in commercializing, and then the other 50% goes back to the inventors for their efforts in commercializing. And that happens after the major costs like patents are paid for. I'm really excited though, because in the last year, we've rolled out this new framework that allows inventors to choose to take ownership and lead commercialization of their own products and services. So in this scenario, you're leading the commercialization, so you're paying all of those costs when it comes to patents and other commercial efforts, contracts that need to be put in place. But you also receive 100% of the revenue that's generated if you are successful in commercializing your product or service. But you aren't left high and dry, because USask will absolutely support you where we can, and more of an advisory role. So you need some support in understanding intellectual property. We can support on that. If you need to access our networks and get introduced to industry partners, we're very happy to do that. So we can take on more of an advisory and supportive role. So we'll never leave you completely on your own unless you want to be. So those are the two main options. When you do work with USAS to commercialize, your first point of contact is our office, so Research Excellence and Innovation. We work with campus innovators, so faculty, students, staff, anybody who's creating inventions on campus using USAS resources. And then we also are externally facing, so we interface with the funders, the industry partners, the investors, and really our goal is to get these two groups connected, right? So we can build those partnerships, and ultimately the goal is to transfer that knowledge outside of the university into products where it can actually make a difference. In terms of how exactly we support USASC inventors, when you come to us with an invention and an idea, we will assess the opportunity, look at the intellectual property strategy. So we will do a patentability assessment. If it is patentable, we will pay all of those costs and manage that patent portfolio. Marketing, I've been saying all along, marketing is so important. And so marketing is a part of what we do as well. We develop a marketing strategy, we identify potential partners, we support engaging those partners, understanding where you fit within the market. We negotiate contracts, so licensing agreements. If we license to a partner, we negotiate on behalf of you as an inventor. We execute those agreements. And I would like to say, though, again, that you are involved in all of these aspects. So you don't just pass the baton and say see you later, unless you really want to, but we really value having our inventors involved in every step of the way. You are the experts, you need to lead a lot of that, and so we work together very collaboratively with our researchers. That's really important. So we can do things like grant support. If you have a commercial grant or it has a commercialization slant to it, we can support in writing those with bandwidth. We can't do every grant, but we support in that way. And then again, startup support. So if you need contacts, if you need to transfer intellectual property from a company or from the university into a company, that's the way that we can support. One key thing I want to note, though, is that we don't actually do the commercialization. So we don't manufacture and sell products. It's just not what the university is set up to do. Takes a lot of resources. There's a lot of risk in that. You have to have a lot of specialized expertise, and we kind of encompass everybody at the university. So we're not designed to be the commercializers, but we support the commercialization process. And ultimately what we do is we license out or assign out to our industry partners or our own startups. And those are the groups that do the real commercialization. So some helpful resources are our people. This is my team. We are small but mighty, and we support all things commercialization on campus. So Merle said she would pass out the information if you don't get it down on paper today or while you're watching this. Merle will send it to you, but please feel free to reach out if you ever have a question or if you have an idea, you're not quite sure if there's an opportunity. These are the people you want to connect with and talk to, and really the earlier the better, especially if you're thinking about sharing your idea. If you have a presentation coming up or you're publishing anything soon, we want to help you identify what the opportunity is and build a strategy around it if that's possible. So please come talk to us as early as you can, and you can check out our website if you want to learn more about what we do and some of the other resources we have available. And now I want to talk about something really exciting, and I'm glad Jenna Lynn is here. Merle, are we out of time?
No, you're doing great. That's why I'm just popping in to say, well, keep going, doing great.
Good, okay. I'm like, oh no, this is the most exciting part of what I want to say. So, okay, USAS can lead the commercialization, or you can lead your own commercialization. So maybe you're here and you're like, hey, I've identified a market need, I have a cool idea, company creation is definitely the way I want to go, but how the heck do I start a business? And I'm so excited to tell you about Opus today. Opus is our USASC incubator supported by provincial funding, and it's really a program designed to meet the needs of USASC founders. Opus is providing access to mentors, advisors, infrastructure. So this program matches individuals, companies with experts who've been there, who've done it, who understand the commercialization process, who can really provide support from the ground up. And identifying, goals for the company, helping the company set out steps to reach those goals. And these mentors and advisors are going to be matched one-on-one to really meet the individual needs. So it's not just general, it's very specific to each need of the participant that comes into the program. And there's a more formal part to this incubator as well. So there'll be workshops, webinars, boot camps. All of these things are designed to build business acumen in the participants. So teach you about business development, how to put together a business plan, how to talk to investors, how to find funding. So the more formal things that you need to know as an entrepreneur, moving from that academic hat to that entrepreneurial hat. And I mean, this is all because founders need support. If we're going to put the intellectual property in your hands, we need to provide a foundation of support for you to be successful. This program is 8 months in length. I'm so excited because we're launching officially tomorrow. Our first cohort is, we're meeting with them. We're going to have our official sort of orientation and launch for the participants. It's 8 months, and right now it's really focused on deep tech. So more STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, but hopefully we can expand that out to more areas of research and that sort of thing on campus. And the reason I'm so excited about this is because there's so much value in having this level of support on campus for our companies. I just want to share this couple stats. One, they're from the US, so take them with a grain of salt, but 87% of companies who go through some sort of incubator mentorship programming survive at 5 years. And that's huge when you compare it to those who do not go through that same mentorship. It's at 44%. So you're almost 50% more likely to be around 5 years later if you've had the support you need to really drive your business skills and understanding of how to be an entrepreneur. So that's huge. And I think that's one of the main reasons we want to have this, because we want this framework to work. We need to be there to support you. So you ever heard that saying, it takes a village to raise a child? Like, it takes a village to raise a startup as well. And so that's what we're trying to build, is this village. And another stat, again from the US, but I love it because it shows the importance of having something local. 84% of companies that graduate from an incubator actually stay in their local community, at least for a period of time. And I think in order to build the entrepreneurial culture and spirit on campus, this is what we need. We need the support here for people to stay local and give back to the community, and also connect with other entrepreneurs. There's more excitement, there's more motivation when you connect with people doing the same thing. And you can learn a lot from entrepreneurs who've been there and done that. And, they can provide that value and understanding back to you. So I'm very excited about Opus because I feel like we're creating that culture, or we're hoping to create that culture with this type of program. And we're going to be answering, so the people going through the incubator are going to be answering a lot of the questions that I talked about today with their own business. So do you have an idea? Is it just an idea, or is there really an opportunity here? And if you just have an idea, how do you build that into an opportunity? You'll learn how to do that in the incubator. How do you define the value of your product and then share that with investors? Oftentimes, researchers, investors are talking two different languages. And so we need to get researchers over here so they can actually relay the value of what they're developing in a non-technical way. Because if you can't relay the value to an investor, you're not going to get money. And so that's a really important component of what we're doing at the incubator. With Opus, IP strategy I've talked about, you're going to learn about that, and it'll be focused on what you're developing in particular. Market validation we've talked about, how to fund your startup. There's various ways to do that. What's best for you? Not all funding is equal. And then building an effective business model. So if you're going to build a house, you usually have a blueprint, right? It's kind of like that. If you're going to build a startup, you need to have a plan. Without a plan, you really don't have much at all. And so I just set this up here, like an idea is nothing without a plan. A business plan will help you clarify strategy, identify roadblocks, determine the resources you need, evaluate your idea. And really the thing here is your investors They don't know your product or your service like you do, as intimately as you do. So all they have to go off of is your business plan. And that's how they're going to be evaluating the feasibility of your business. And so if you don't have a plan, or if you can't articulate that plan, it's going to be very difficult to get funding. And so that's another piece of what you'll be learning as a participant in the incubators. All these things that help you develop that business acumen that you need to support a successful business. This is just an infographic on the reasons why, top 20 reasons why startups fail. Again, a lot of these things are things that are going to be a focus of the incubator. We've talked about them already. No plan, you ran out of cash, there's no market. All of these types of questions are things that you will learn about and learn how to answer for yourself and your own business with the incubator. So I just wanted to share that. And Jenna Lynn is your most helpful resource in this department. Jenna Lynn is here today. She is the program coordinator. She is all things Opus. She knows everything about this. She developed the program from the ground up. She's a great resource. She's always happy to chat. So I would say if you have an idea or you just want to know how you can get involved, please contact Jenna Lynn directly. She's happy to chat. If you want to know more about the program, you want to check out the website, go to opus.usas.ca. Join our mailing list because you'll get updates on events and things happening around campus so you can stay connected. And really just reach out. Like, people are your greatest resource here. So reach out and have a conversation. And then, you know, the last thing I wanted to say is, like, if you're still not really sure about which path to take when it comes to commercialization, I said before, when you're starting a company, I think it's as much a personal decision as it is a business decision. So start asking yourself some of these questions, like, why do you want to start a business? Are you really passionate about what you're doing? Do you have time to dedicate to your business, like a real amount of time to watch it, to, you know, see it succeed? What strengths are you bringing to your startup? What are your weaknesses? Do you work well in a team? Are you coachable? Can you relinquish control when you have to, when it's better for your company for somebody on your team to take the lead on something? I wrote this, or I didn't write it, but I put this funny meme, like, I didn't choose the entrepreneur life chose me. But I feel like sometimes that's really true, right? If you're born to be an entrepreneur and you have it in your spirit, you will become an entrepreneur if you have that drive and that passion. So just make sure it's something that you really want to do, because it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. I keep saying blood, sweat, and tears, but I feel like that's the truth. I'm not an entrepreneur myself, but I think a lot of entrepreneurs say the same thing. It takes a lot of resilience to build a company from the ground up and see it succeed. So with that, thank you guys so much for listening to my talk. I don't have anything else for you, but if there's questions, you know, feel free, if you're watching this after the fact, please reach out, contact me or anybody else that I've shared in this slide deck. We're always happy to chat.
That was absolutely fantastic. And before I let everyone go, and before I kind of, you know, that was very informative. I agree, Jenna Lynn. Thank you so much. Erin, I'm curious to know, does REI keep stats on sort of, you know, when an idea comes to your office and you coach them through, like, is this, you know, do you want to go in this direction? Do you want to go in this direction? Do we have stats? Do we know what direction do people, sorry, that's my cat.
Yeah.
What direction do people normally choose, and why? And what sorts of reasoning might they give?
So I'm not sure we have a good capture of the reasoning, but we've certainly, because we're rolling out this new framework, we've started to really capture, we're having the conversations with inventors about these options, and now we're starting to more formally capture whether or not they want to lead commercialization on their own, or whether or not they want to, you know, lead with USask. So I don't have those numbers for you right now, because it's early in the rollout process. I think a lot of people are familiar with working with USask, so it makes sense to do that. But I think as we roll out these new startup resources, right, Opus, and people start to see the value in participating in these programs and really being able to drive their own commercialization, we might see more of a switch to people wanting to lead. And certainly there's this hybrid option that we often see where people will work with USask, right, for a number of years, and at some point they decide that they want to go out on their own and develop a company. Maybe they've had, you know, some discussions with industry or investors that get excited, and so then we can transfer that intellectual property into a company. And I'm not sure if we're capturing that, but we certainly have a number of, we can capture the number of startups at USask, and I don't have that number on the top of my head. John might know better than I do, but we certainly can capture the number of startups and the years that they are founded and that sort of thing. But you're right, you know, capturing that decision point, I think, will be important moving forward. So
I'm not sure if it's important or if I'm just being curious. That could be. I think, but related to this, and I'm thankful that Jenilyn is here as well. I'm curious, the larger entrepreneurial community in Saskatchewan, you know, between you know, places like CoLabs or AgWest Bio or various other sort of support kind of groups. Having a new one that's centered right at the University of Saskatchewan, what are we doing that's different, and what's our value add proposition? Are we just wanting to make sure that we create a better connection between that, or just that from a research kind of point of view, we have different needs?
I can answer. I also would offer Jenilyn to jump into, but I think we do have a unique position at the university to really take on the needs of university-based founders. And one of the reasons for focusing on deep tech early on is because there's, you know, in terms of like differences with CoLabs, right? There's longer incubation time for some of these technologies. A lot of research dollars have to go in. There's a lot of time it takes to develop these. And so there's unique regulatory needs, and just understanding very early stage founders not having the business knowledge, right? Maybe early on. And so really developing those skills so they can go on to some of these accelerators like Cultivator and be successful in those programs, because they've early on got some of these business skills that they really need to be successful in those programs. So I think we're working at I said pre-accelerator stage, we're like the pre-incubator program in the province that's really focused on USask needs, because we are USask focused, and then building that out so they can go on and be successful. Did I answer any, Jenilyn?
Absolutely.
You said it perfectly. And also, Merle, you also touched upon all those other benefits with regards to Opus and how it's different from other incubators and accelerators here. The other thing I would just add is just the access to the expertise that we have here on campus. So people like Aaron and John who know what it takes, you know, in order to help commercialize a product or invention, innovation that's happening here on campus. So yeah, perfectly said. Thanks, Aaron.
No worries. I guess, and use of lab space and infrastructure on campus and legitimizing that for building out these businesses, I think, is really important. We have unique facilities here that our researchers can tap into and leverage, you know, to build their businesses. And so I think we want to help facilitate that in a way that makes it easy for companies to adapt.
And I really appreciate that. One of the spaces, so last summer we developed a series of secret USask tours. One was to the heating and cooling plant, which was very fun, but another tour that we did was to the physics, sort of the physics building, and we started in the physics basement where there's machine shop, and the physics machine shop is a space that's highly connected to this sort of entrepreneurial space on campus, where they'll sort of do a first round or a first cut of some of these, you know, new items, or, you know, see if it works, and it was a really fun space to visit. So thanks very much for being with us today. Thank you for showcasing this sense of entrepreneurship that you guys are deliberately growing here at the University of Saskatchewan. And we really appreciate gifting some of that knowledge to the students in the SURE programs to kind of bring us all along for the ride and say, okay, not only are we understanding entrepreneurship within the USask context and seeing how we can grow that entrepreneurial mindset, but also to learn more about how the business community in general works. We're in it, you know, as students, we're all going to be jumping into that fairly soon. And so having that understanding of how that larger business community works and how to be a good citizen and part of it and showcase that, I think is an important and valuable lesson for student professional development. And so we really appreciate all of you coming and gifting us with that knowledge. With that, next week, John Mapletofft will be with us to talk about intellectual property and development and intellectual property and licensing. So to really delve into that. And so join us then.
Oh, good. I'm glad he's following. So fits with what I've just shared.
Yeah, it absolutely does. It's perfect. I think that we went through it this year with that in mind, knowing how to make things fit together. Gentlemen spent a lot of time on that, so we appreciate it very much. All right, with that, thank you all very much. I'm going to stop the recording.